other print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 6, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are the Russell 2000, which tracks shares of smaller companies, climbed some 22% in the first 6 months of the year, posting its best first half since 1991 and beating the NASDAQ Composite by around 9 percentage points. After 5 years on the road, the average EV will still be able to drive up to 95% of its original range, better than many in the auto industry expected. A year ago, the message from many business leaders was that AI was going to wipe out jobs, but the narrative has shifted from worker-light doomsday scenarios to a future in which workers keep their jobs and get a productivity boost. The co-founder of $8 billion asset management firm Brandshill Investments was ousted for not complying with its own in-office policy, and now he is suing. The American steel industry is reaping the benefits of the AI data center construction boom, but now it is warning of a high-stakes competition with their data center customers for electricity. The slice of private software debt worth less than 80% of its original value hit a 5-year high last year, according to an analysis provided by MSCI. That share peaked at 6.1% at the end of September, or roughly 5 months before software company stocks declined on worries about AI tools. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. Controversy erupted at the World Cup after Trump personally intervened to have U.S. striker Folarin Balogun reinstated for the team's game Monday against Belgium, following his red card suspension in the previous round. Iran, Russia, North Korea, and other targets of sanctions have dramatically increased their use of virtual currencies to bypass traditional banks and duck U.S. pressure. NASA Chief Jared Isaacman flew a vintage jet fighter at the 4th of July air show over Washington, despite air safety regulators' objections. A growing number of GOP lawmakers have little incentive to come to work or toe the party line, putting critical legislation in danger as Republicans lurch toward the midterms. The U.S. rang in its 250th birthday in the Capitol with record-setting heat, thunderstorms, and an enormous fireworks display, and a speech from Trump emphasizing American exceptionalism. Democrats are casting the president's growing in-office wealth as corruption and a sign he has lost focus on Americans' finances. The nation's former top military officer, C.Q. Brown, questioned Trump's deployment of troops in U.S. cities and warned against tainting the armed forces service with politics. China released a prominent Christian pastor, Ezra Jin, from jail after 9 months following pressure from the U.S. The picture on today's front page is of a huge gathering, and that headline reads, "Throngs mourn Iran leader killed early in war." The caption, "Defiant." People gathered in Tehran Sunday to pay their respects to the late Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who died in February amid Israeli and U.S. airstrikes. The regime is seeking to use the mass gatherings to galvanize supporters. The article, Khamenei's Funeral Profiles a Defiant Iran, by Suni Engel Rasmussen and Benoit Falcon. Large crowds gathered in Tehran as Iran began 6 days of funeral ceremonies for its slain supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in what the Islamic Republic is framing as a show of defiance against the West. Iranian authorities predicted that as many as 20 million people would turn out to honor Khamenei, who was killed alongside several family members in the first wave of Israeli and U.S. airstrikes on Tehran more than 4 months ago. Thousands of black-clad mourners began convening at dawn Saturday outside Tehran's Grand Masala Mosque, where Khamenei's body has lain in state since Friday. The body will later tour several sites around the country and go to Iraq before being buried in Khamenei's birthplace in eastern Iran. Ahead of the ceremonies, foreign dignitaries convened to pay their respects, including Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, and He Wei, vice chairman of China's top lawmaking body. Pakistan, Iraq, India, Turkey, and other countries also sent representatives. Other articles from the front page follow. Rogue nations employ crypto to bypass Western sanctions, by Patricia Kausman. Iran, Russia, North Korea, and other targets of sanctions have dramatically increased their use of virtual currencies to duck U.S. pressure, handling around $100 billion of crypto last year alone, firms that track the flows say. They are also becoming more sophisticated in how they navigate the market, creating their own digital tokens and crypto exchanges to help process transactions, the firms and Western authorities say. Iran and Russia have used virtual cash to buy drones and weapon parts, and Russia has used it to pay salaries for seafarers who smuggle their crude around the world, Western officials and crypto analytics firms say. North Korea, which has mastered the art of stealing crypto through hacks and other cyber crimes, has used it to buy fuel and military equipment, officials said. Using crypto enables them to bypass traditional banks, which play a central role in policing sanctions imposed by the U.S. and others. Crypto has changed the sanctions evasion game significantly, said Caitlin Martin, a senior intelligence analyst at analytics firm Chainalysis. It estimates that cryptocurrency addresses linked to entities under sanctions received over $100 billion in 2025, almost 8 times the amount received in 2024. Russia considers international sanctions to be illegal under international law and has deployed and developed alternative mechanisms that allow the economy to function normally, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said. North Korea recently called allegations that it engages in cyber crimes absurd slander and an extension of Washington's hostile policy toward Pyongyang. Tehran didn't reply to a request for comment. Trump's FIFA call keeps player in for U.S. Americans won't be without a star in World Cup match after intervention. By Joshua Robinson, Josh Dawsey, and Andrew Beaton. The most stunning controversy of the 2026 World Cup erupted on Sunday after it emerged that President Trump personally intervened to have U.S. striker Folarin Balogun reinstated for the team's round of 16 game against Belgium following his red card in the previous round. Trump called FIFA President Gianni Infantino last week, urging him to review Balogun's automatic one-game suspension, people familiar with the matter said. Trump told Infantino that everyone was telling him the decision was wrong, and Infantino promised to look into the matter. Later, the FIFA president called the U.S. president back and told him the suspension would be reversed and that Balogun would be free to face Belgium on Monday, one of the people said. Zombie Congress imperils GOP plans by Olivia Beavers, Washington. A growing number of GOP lawmakers have little incentive to come to work or toe the party line, putting critical legislation in danger as Republicans lurch toward the midterms. Some are privately calling it the Zombie Congress. GOP leaders are increasingly concerned that members will lose motivation to show up or may break with the party if they do, potentially stalling or killing some bills, according to lawmakers and aides. While the Senate has been the main focus of GOP cracks, the House is also facing an uncertain summer and fall, with attendance issues and a renewed sense of independence among retiring, defeated, or angry members, threatening to upend the Republican agenda. If you're not at least a little bit frustrated right now, then I question maybe your sanity. Nobody signed up for this, said Representative Steve Womack, Republican from Arkansas, who worried problems passing bills could hurt GOP chances in the fall. Right now, it's almost like shooting ourselves in the foot, he said. Just last week, a renewed rebellion over the stalled Save America Act voter ID bill stopped action on the House floor and prompted Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, to throw in the towel and send members home early for the 4th of July holiday. On a typically party-line procedural vote meant to set the agenda for the week, holdouts led by Representative Anna Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida, swelled to more than a dozen to easily block the measure. I don't care who in this chamber hates me for it, Luna said on social media. 7 Republicans missed the procedural vote entirely. Almost none can be spared given the party's narrow 219 to 212 majority, which includes one independent who caucuses with the GOP. Even as routine daily votes are going off the rails, Johnson and President Trump are pushing for a third-party line budget reconciliation bill following the tax law last year and $70 billion for immigration enforcement in June. A new measure could include Republican priorities such as a big defense spending boost, bypassing Democratic objections. Republican absences or defections could doom the already long-shot effort. The entire Congress has been about 3 or 4, maybe 1 or no vote margin, and then it's exacerbated by the fact that the people who can vote are not here, said GOP Representative Kevin Hern, who is running for Senate in Oklahoma. In an election year, people who lose are going to be less enthusiastic about coming back, he said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. No going back, the inside story of Europe's rupture with America. Trump's tariffs and threats against Greenland spurred a rebellion. By Joe Parkinson, Drew Hinshaw, and Daniel Michaels. It was almost midnight in Brussels, and the leaders of Europe were locked in their 5th hour of an emergency meeting with a single theme for discussion: how to manage a breakup with America. The new year was only 3 weeks old, and President Trump, after removing Venezuela's autocratic strongman, had briefly threatened to seize Greenland from Denmark. Around a circular table in the European Council headquarters known as the Space Egg, heads of government were venting so emotionally about the 47th president that some would later call the session Therapy Night. We are drawing a line here, began Emmanuel Macron, president of France, according to several leaders present and their most senior aides. For a year, America's closest allies have tried to placate Trump with a mix of flattery and concessions, hoping to buy time. Now, French soldiers were in Greenland alongside Danish special forces equipped for a shooting war with America. The French president repeated an argument he'd been pressing for years, that Europe's over-reliance on America was a security risk. There is no going back, he said. A clutch of European leaders chimed in to complain that the administration seemed more interested in mining and energy deals than upholding America's traditional role in the world. Europe risked becoming a miserable slave to the U.S., groused the Prime Minister of Belgium. Hours passed as people talked over each other in a conversation with such seismic implications it seemed surreal. In its 250th year, had America, protector of Europe, now become a threat? Several participants mentioned a man who wasn't in the room. Mark Carney, the new Canadian Prime Minister, had been regularly messaging Europe's major leaders, trying to persuade them that the old America isn't coming back. Now, on the heels of a blistering speech at the annual Davos gathering, his arguments were gaining ground. Canada, said the Prime Minister of Spain, is openly saying what we should do. In the months to come, the January crisis meeting would be remembered by Europe's most powerful figures as the moment that countries bound together by blood and a sense of shared destiny since World War II began to explore separate paths. Nobody has filed divorce papers, and important players on both sides are working hard to keep a loveless marriage going. Untangling the ties between Europe and the US would be a massive undertaking. Canada, which is encouraging Europe to hedge against a more capricious America, is paradoxically much more reliant on the US than almost any country on earth. Militarily, it is hard to imagine the Allies entirely going separate ways. This week's summit of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will test the resolve of leaders to preserve an iconic fixture of Western might in the face of growing mutual distrust. Small Stocks Logging Best Run in Decades by Hannah Aaron Lang and Shraddha Dinesh. Small companies are punching above their weight on Wall Street. The Russell 2000, which tracks shares of smaller companies, climbed some 22% in the first 6 months of the year. That is the best first half since 1991, beating the NASDAQ Composite by around 9 percentage points, its largest outperformance in that period since 2006. At one point last week, the index notched 4 straight record closes. It is an often overlooked bright spot in a market that has for years been dominated by the trillion-dollar giants of the artificial intelligence trade. Some investors are taking it as a sign that the recent run-up in stock prices, confined mostly to big chip companies such as Intel or Micron Technology, is at long last spreading to other corners of the market. Battery Durability Energizes EV Drivers by Ellie Davis. Richard Simmons recently took his 5-year-old Tesla Model 3 on a 260-mile road trip across England without having to stop for a charge. The new electric vehicle could make the trip no problem. But Simon's car, which he has affectionately nicknamed Miles, has logged 247,000 miles and is still up for frequent long-distance drives. Simon's, the owner of a UK-based used car sales company that specializes in EVs, has found that the batteries that power these cars continue to perform well even after several 100,000 miles. This has come as a welcome surprise to him and other EV enthusiasts. They are proving themselves to be exceptionally reliable, Simons said. After 5 years on the road, the average EV will still be able to drive up to 95% of its original range, according to Recurrent, a data science company that provides a battery monitoring tool for EVs, better than many in the auto industry expected. What World Cup? Italians are having the worst summer ever. While the rest of the world revels, Italy does its best to ignore the tournament. By Margherita Stancotti, Marcus Walker, and Alexandro Boldrini. Rome. The World Cup is in full swing and people the world over are having a ball. But in Rome, it's easy to forget there is a tournament. Few bars are showing it, and only tourists are watching. Sometimes I feel a flicker of curiosity and I wonder what's going on at the World Cup, said Saverio Massi Benedetti, a fund manager an avid fan of AS Roma, the biggest team in the Italian capital. So I Google World Cup 2026, but as soon as the page loads, the spark of interest has already died inside me. The failure of Italy's national team to qualify for the World Cup for the third time in a row is such an embarrassment in this soccer mad country that Italians are purposefully ignoring it. Now for other articles within the paper. How to build a better retirement spending plan than the 4% rule. How to avoid blind spots of the 4% retirement rule. There are ways to make spending more responsive to life expectancy and how markets perform. By Peter Coy. Most retirees are familiar with the 4% rule. It's a guide many financial pros have extolled for decades for the decumulation phase of retirement, the time when you finally start tapping the money you've spent decades, ideally, saving and investing. Withdraw 4% of your portfolio in the first year of retirement, then adjust that amount for inflation every year thereafter. If your portfolio starts out at $1 million, for instance, you spend $40,000 the first year, then $40,000 plus inflation the next year, and so on. The rule was devised in 1994 by financial advisor William Bergen after research showed that retirees with a balanced stock and bond portfolio who follow that math wouldn't have run out of money over any 30-year period since 1926, even when economic conditions were bad. It's pretty simple, maybe too simple. The 4% rule has some blind spots. It assumes a 30-year retirement, but some retirees will need their money to last longer than that. It also assumes the markets will perform as well as they have over the past century. As a result, researchers have been lowering or raising the figure for years. Investment research firm Morningstar revises its estimate annually. It was 3.3% in 2021 and 3.9% this year. Bergen himself has said that a safe number could now be 4.7%. The rule's deeper problem is its rigidity. Your portfolio amount could double in a market boom during retirement, and the rule would still limit you to the same inflation-adjusted amount, which would be unnecessarily frugal. More concerning, your assets could fall by a third, and the rule wouldn't tell you to curtail your spending. You would have to liquidate a bigger portion of your portfolio to withdraw the prescribed amount. If that happens a few years in a row, you run a real risk of eventually outliving your money, despite what the historical data say. The good news is that there are ways to make retirement spending more responsive to how long you're likely to live and how markets perform. Use the 4% rule as a reference point rather than have it be the full plan. Instead of spending a fixed inflation-adjusted dollar amount every year, you need to factor in your life expectancy and the size of your portfolio and then adjust accordingly. You divide your current portfolio balance by the number of years you can expect to live and spend that much in the coming year. The following year, you do the math again with your new portfolio balance and your new remaining life expectancy. You can find your life expectancy at your current age in the Social Security Administration's life tables, which are updated annually. Keep in mind that tables don't apply to any specific person. They don't factor in health issues or family medical history. You may want to be conservative and go beyond your life expectancy, or take a chance and reduce it. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, The Elephant at the NATO Summit. A U.S. troop withdrawal is a dangerous signal to Vladimir Putin. President Trump has been gearing up for this week's North Atlantic Treaty Organization Summit by complaining that the alliance is a ripoff. But the real question at the meeting is about the United States, as the administration yanks troops from Europe without owning up to the risks to U.S. security. The United States spends more money on NATO than any other country by far to protect them, without getting any benefit from doing so. The president vented on social media on Thursday. This ignores that peace in Europe is a core U.S. interest and not charity work, as those who survived the 20th century can attest. The president deserves credit for demanding that Europeans spend on defense, and this is a heavy political lift in complacent democracies that will take persuasion and compromise. Yet NATO allies increased spending 20% last year alone, and an influx of cash is now chasing too little manufacturing capacity after decades of neglect. You're really at the max absorption capacity because you have to hire the men and women in uniform. You have to make sure the defense industrial output is there. As NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte put it during his visit to Washington recently. So there's a max on what you can do year on year. The irony is that U.S. leadership in NATO is essential to make sure that money is spent to produce combat power. Some allies will be tempted to squander money on their own national vanity fighter jet projects or bet on unproven technology to avoid a real military expansion. In other words, European rearmament will take time, and nobody even pretends that European troops are fully prepared to replace American brigades. Yet, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth recently trumpeted that the Pentagon had reduced the U.S. footprint to pre-2022 levels with the redeployment of a Brigade combat team last year and further reduction of 5,000 forces earlier this year. The Pentagon has also been leaking that it's telling NATO to count on less U.S. air and naval power in force planning for a crisis. But where's the evidence that threats to the U.S. are lower than in 2022 when Vladimir Putin rolled tanks into Ukraine? The direction U.S. troops in Europe should move is east to the front, Poland and the Baltics. Yet that doesn't seem to be what the administration has in mind as it threatens a 6-month review of its European posture. Pulling troops is a message of American ambivalence that Mr. Putin will hear, which brings us to Ukraine. The president may repeat his refrain that Ukraine isn't America's problem, but that would miss a strategic opportunity. Ukraine is hurting Mr. Putin with precision strikes on targets in Russia, and the president likes to ride a winner. An infusion of U.S. long-range missiles could compound Ukraine's gains and give Mr. Trump more leverage to force Mr. Putin to cut a deal. The administration tried to force Ukraine into a bad deal in 2025 on the argument that it was about to lose the Donbass, a perennial prediction that hasn't happened. Yet, even if Mr. Trump won't help Ukraine, the Western alliance still has to deter a wounded Russian dictator who is spending 40% of his budget on the military. The Kremlin has been probing NATO defenses with drone incursions and spying on undersea cables. Mr. Putin's appetite for risk-taking is all the more reason not to pull conventional forces from the continent. Cuts to conventional assets mean Mr. Trump will have to rely more on U.S. nuclear deterrence. The president professes to hate nuclear weapons, and Mr. Putin may figure Mr. Trump would never use them, say, to defend the Baltic states. The NATO meeting will be mostly photos of European diplomats smiling nervously and hoping it ends without a blow-up. But for a man who prides himself on understanding that hard power governs the world, the president is getting bad advice that will produce weaker deterrence in Europe. From the opinion pages, How Government Spending Enriches the Wealthy, by Vivek Ramaswamy. New York Socialist Mayor Zoran Mandani scored a hat trick on June 24th when all three of his endorsed candidates won Democratic House primaries. More than 30 candidates backed by the Democratic Socialist of America have won primaries this election cycle. A Democratic Socialist captured the Democratic nomination for mayor of Washington, and another advanced to a runoff in Los Angeles. A Gallup survey last fall found that 66% of Democrats view socialism favorably, and only 42% say the same of capitalism. In my home state, Amy Acton, the Democratic nominee for Ohio governor, has promised to forgive Ohioans' medical debt on her first day in office. She also calls for new child care subsidies and other expenditures that would add at least $20 billion, by our calculations, to the state's annual budget, which Republican state legislatures say would require doubling the state income tax. Democrats nationwide are genuflecting before the DSA. A day after California's proposed 5% wealth tax on billionaires qualified for the November ballot, Governor Gavin Newsom, who opposes the measure, published an essay calling for a national billionaires tax on Americans worth more than $100 million. American wealth is concentrated at the top. On this narrow point, the socialists are correct. The top 1% now holds roughly 30% of the nation's net worth, and the bottom half holds about 2.5%. But the greatest driver of inequality over the past 5 years was exactly what the socialists now demand more of: large-scale government spending. When Washington floods the economy with borrowed and freshly printed dollars, the money flows first into assets owned by the wealthiest Americans: stocks, bonds, Real estate. 6 relief laws pushed roughly $4.6 trillion out the door in the bipartisan response to the pandemic. The Federal Reserve cut interest rates to zero and more than doubled its balance sheet from about $4 trillion to nearly $9 trillion. Only some of that money reached working class Americans. Economists at MIT found that about a quarter of the $800 billion from the Paycheck Protection Program went to workers who would have lost their jobs. 3/4 landed in the top fifth of households by income at a cost of $170,000 to $257,000 per job year saved, a regressive windfall. The student loan payment pause tells the same story. It has cost well over $200 billion, and because high earners carry the biggest balances, most of that relief went to white-collar professionals. As big government pumped money into the economy, assets boomed. The stock market has roughly tripled from its March 2020 low. The wealthiest 10% of households own 89% of all stocks, according to 2021 Federal Reserve data. The top 1% gained more than $6.5 trillion in equity wealth during the pandemic, while the bottom 90% added just $1.2 trillion. The wealth share of the top 1% hit a record high in mid-2021, and American billionaires' fortunes swelled by roughly 70%. The rich got richer because of the socialist remedy, government spending. Working families footed the bill in two forms. The first was inflation. Consumer prices peaked at 9.1% in June 2022, with inflation growing at its fastest pace since 1981. Groceries rose 12.2% in a single year, and gasoline nearly 60%. As paychecks lagged, real wages fell, down 3.6% over the year ending in June 2022, and the federal minimum wage reached its lowest real value since 1956. The second financial pressure on working class Americans was a post-pandemic property tax that hit states like Ohio hard. The only meaningful asset most middle-class Ohioans own is their house, and home prices in Ohio rose over 25% between 2020 and 2022. That paper gain was a financial curse for families intending to stay put. While real income remained flat, tax bills went up. Ohio homeowners absorbed in 2023 the largest reappraisal shock on record. One analysis found the increase was more than 7 times the size of the previous cycles, averaging nearly 35%. See a pattern here? Washington spent and printed trillions in the name of ordinary Americans. The money inflated the assets of the wealthy, widening the gap that now propels democratic socialists to power while inflating the price of everything. Now the same movement that demanded government spending points to the inequality it produced to justify more government spending. The way out isn't socialism. It's to stop debasing the dollar, halt the bipartisan spending spree, unleash energy production, Let Americans keep what they earn and expand the economy so workers' paychecks stay ahead of inflation. Lasting reform requires serious change in Washington, but states can make a difference. If elected, I'll govern Ohio to create a haven for value creators who seek refuge from the ascendant wave of socialism. America may now need it more than ever. Mr. Ramaswamy is the Republican nominee for governor of Ohio. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The socialist threat is real. America will be in serious trouble if Democrats fail to defend their party. By Mark Penn and Andrew Stein. Last month's election results in New York, Colorado, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere are a 9/11 call for the Democratic Party and America. The advancement of the Democratic Socialist of America members to Congress, state legislatures, and local offices, often by beating Democratic incumbents, shows how broken the primary system is and how alienated young, educated white voters in urban areas have become. The turnouts in New York's elections were well below anything that could be called representative of the community. Only 18% to 25% of registered Democrats voted in each of the closed primaries for 3 contested House nominations. This means that a good organizational effort can impose its will with less than 15% of the party electorate. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won her first primary in 2018 with fewer than 17,000 votes in a district of 715,000 eligible voters. Since these are overwhelmingly Democratic districts, Republicans and independents don't count at all, and turnout, not viewpoint, becomes the critical factor. This revolution is driven not by the working class, but by the urban professional class that is willing to support candidates who celebrate 9/11, cheer at the massacre of 1,000 Israeli and American kids, would defund the police, abolish prisons, end private property, and open the borders. New York's Representative Adriano Espaillat, chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, lost his seat. Even Letitia James, the Empire State's left-wing attorney general, was troubled by the results. Some of the candidates that Mayor Zohran Mamdani has supported are individuals who do not understand the politics of New York City, the cultural differences from district to district, who have not been part of the history and the struggle of some of these districts and are relatively new to the body politic. This wake-up call requires action at all levels. Representative Tom Swayze, Democrat from New York, and Adam Gray, Democrat from California, have formed a coalition, Promise to America, that stands for moderate principles. We are capitalist, not socialist. We want safety, not lawlessness. We are fiscally responsible, not reckless. We believe government should solve problems, not create them. We are mainstream, not extreme. We are proud, not ashamed of America. So far, 8 other Democratic lawmakers and 5 candidates have signed on. In a closely divided Congress, this bloc could yield considerable power. But moderates alone can't defeat this movement. Left of center voices like James Carville, Neera Tandon, and Miss James have sounded the alarm and will have to split from the far left or find themselves sidelined. Voter registration and turnout are nonprofit activities, and that means mainstream politicians need new get out the vote organizations to mobilize the huge majority of voters who are sitting at home while socialists and communists make their way into positions of power. Lawmakers, law enforcement agencies, and journalists should investigate the DSA to see if it is being funded by foreign governments and interest. Political action committees and advocacy groups that have focused on federal races have to realize that the DSA initially focuses on low turnout local races and nonprofit boards as easy targets. Once in power, its members degrade law enforcement with policies that encourage street vagrancy, drug abuse, and higher taxes, fueling more voter anger, which they exploit at election time. Modern PACs, and other groups need a battle plan for every campaign from district attorney to Congress, city council to state legislature. They also need a communications program on social media aimed at educating young people about the events that schools ignore, from the bloody history of communism to the Holocaust and 9/11. They need to learn that the true aim of Iran and their proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah is the destruction of Israel and Jews everywhere. They need to understand that competence, not TikTok videos, matter, and that without police, urban life would be hell. If these things don't happen, New York and other cities will decay further. More productive citizens will vote with their feet. Vagrants and criminals will overtake more public spaces. Social service costs will explode, and schools will deteriorate further. Republicans may gain in the short run, but they aren't a factor in most major cities, and they have shown a capacity to lose against an increasingly left-wing Democratic Party, as they did in 2006, 2008, 2012, 2018, and 2020. If mainstream Democrats don't retake their party, you may not recognize America the next time it wins a national election. Our freedom still needs defending. Social media and AI harm the body politics in ways Tocqueville and Lincoln couldn't possibly foresee. By Paul Wolfowitz. When Abraham Lincoln was serving in the Illinois House of Representatives and not yet 30, he predicted that the greatest danger to America would come from within, not from foreign armies crossing vast oceans. Geography provided security, safeguarding American lives and freedoms. More than 20 years later at Gettysburg, in the middle of a horrible war that had grimly confirmed his earlier prediction, President Lincoln urged the Union to continue fighting to ensure that these honored dead shall not have died in vain. In this justly celebrated speech, Lincoln cited 1776 and the Declaration of Independence with assertions that all men are created equal, and the Declaration says, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Lincoln was saying something fundamental. The Declaration, not the Constitution with its indefensible compromises on slavery, was the cause worth fighting for. It is the Declaration and those principles whose birthday we celebrated this July 4th as we do every year. Lincoln clearly knew that the America of 1776 was far from being a nation of equal rights, nor was it in his time. But the country for which he gave his life has come a long way toward making those principles a reality. In the years that followed, American people abolished slavery, amended a constitution that had accommodated it, expanded civil and political rights that had long been denied to millions, and became a great multi-ethnic democracy. These achievements represent extraordinary progress toward the promise inscribed in the Declaration of Independence. Yet freedom today is at risk at home and from abroad. Unfortunately, the great oceans which kept foreign tyrants away in Lincoln's time have been shrunk by technology, enabling those tyrants to intervene in our politics. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea share an interest in weakening the U.S. and discrediting democratic institutions. Their governments suppress freedom among their own citizens and work to undermine it in free countries. American democracy has also been transformed from within. Alexis de Tocqueville, a French aristocrat who spent months traveling through the U.S. in the early 19th century, was impressed by the tendency of Americans to form associations. Citizens joined churches, civic organizations, charitable societies, and political movements. Tocqueville believed these associations were a source of American strength because they taught habits of cooperation and self-government. Technology has expanded Americans' ability to associate. Citizens can communicate instantly with thousands of like-minded people anywhere in the world. Information can be shared with unprecedented speed and communities formed at almost no cost. This development has brought enormous benefits, but also consequences Tocqueville couldn't foresee. Americans live in separate digital communities. They consume different information, participate in different conversations, and inhabit different realities. Technology has turbocharged our ability to associate, but not our ability to deliberate together as citizens. Algorithms reward outrage. Social media amplifies conflict. Political and cultural disagreements that once remained local can become national controversies within hours. Artificial intelligence will accelerate these trends. The difficulties extend beyond partisan politics. Democracy itself becomes difficult when citizens lose confidence in one another and in the legitimacy of the institutions that govern them. The challenge, therefore, isn't to prevent innovation, but to ensure that free societies remain capable of governing themselves, which requires a degree of seriousness too often absent from American politics. Republicans and Democrats alike have contributed to the divisions that weaken the country. Our political divisions are serious, but they are nowhere near the existential crisis that confronted Lincoln. Americans have every reason to believe that they can be